Hello everyone, this is Cosmin Popan, and together with Esther Anaya, we will be presenting today our chapter that is in preprint, focusing on a topic of concern, which is the intersectional precarity of gig workers, the case of food couriers, and obviously the case of cyclists doing this kind of work. Both me and Esther have an interest in this topic. She's more concerned with gender issues and inequalities. I have been working, on the other hand, for the last year on a project that's a 3 years project on the working conditions of food couriers in 3 different countries. So today we're going to be presenting this research we have been doing, and the chapter focusing initially on the context of why cycling, why work, and why deliveries, mapping the historical connections between the 3. Then we will discuss various issues related to precarity. On the one hand, the precarious access to the roads, but also more generally precarity that food couriers, cycle couriers face, and various layers of intersectionality that are at play. We will be discussing then a topic of concern, which is our aim here to decolonize cycling and gig economy research. Then we will move to the more empirical section of our presentation, which is a focus on the one hand on women's experiences and the added layer of complexity to their work and to their precarious situations when they do cycle deliveries, and then migrants. We will come to a conclusion by discussing, okay, what is to be done, what is the hope here for these precarious workers, by focusing on individual and collective forms of resistance before our concluding remarks. Okay, so cycling, work, and deliveries. There is this paradox of flexibility, both for the bicycle and for the platform work, that we want to highlight here. There is this idea that a bicycle is a easy to ride kind of a vehicle for everyone on the one hand, and also a tool that allows us to easily navigate urban environments, increasingly congested urban environments. On the other hand, this newly emerging gig work, platform work, is also framed as something that is a flexible kind of work, which nevertheless kind of hides from view its precariousness. So we argue here that there is some sort of an affinity between the two. And we see indeed that many platforms use and entice people to use bicycles to navigate urban environments and deliver food. What is also important to keep into consideration is that there is a history of cycling and work, and cycling and deliveries more specifically. I think it is important to see this gradual transition to an extent from bicycle being used for leisure and leisure practices when they were so-called invented in late 1800s, were becoming these working class tools that we see them increasingly more so by the working class and working poor in global south, but also global north. At the same time, we see this transitioning from using bikes to access work to using bikes to do the work. And here the role of the messengers from the 90s, the cycle messengers, they act as a precedent for what we see today, this digital age where we see many more such food couriers, not just couriers, and how they are seen to represent the future of work. So we are discussing here the role of this flexibility, both in relation to cycling and work. And here the very idea of play is very interesting to keep in mind, because cycling has an ambiguous relationship with work and play, being this dismissed vehicle because it's a kid's toy, or various unfit characters that use bicycles. But also the platform work itself uses these gamification principles to recruit, exploit, keep captive users and workers. And here you can see a rating system in place for my own exploits with Glovo. On the other hand, this concept of exploitation is very important here to take into consideration to explain this ambivalence of play and work, this issue of having control over how much, when, how one works versus having no choice but to work, oftentimes a full-time job, and how these identities are sometimes at play here, to say so, but only one is being presented as the desirable one or the obvious one, the fun bit, not necessarily the exploitation, obviously. This exploitation, we want to get into more detail here because we argue that there is a precarity which is a bit more complex than we would think in the first place. So there's a precarity, obviously, with cycling that we all know, participants at this conference, when it comes to accessing the road space. Robert Egan has written about precarious entitlement to the road, which has to do with accessing the space and neglect from the police. But we argue also for this intersectional understanding of precariousness when it comes to platform work, where added to this being cycling and being precarious on the road, we have various individual dimensions that have to do with gender, race, but also class and disability, for example. So it is important to understand this precarity beyond just not being able to touch a paycheck, as Ferguson and Lee argue, but to understand issues of identity, gender, family, national membership, and so on, that were long anchored by the social ideal of the proper job. Equally important is to understand this process of decolonization that needs to go together when we are looking at this phenomenon, which are global phenomenon indeed, and much research has been looking at the Western context, but we want to indeed give voice to global South researchers. So there is a geographical scope here where we are looking at what is happening in South America, as you can see there with rapid couriers. Focusing on the local specificities there that have to do with historical and structural forms of oppression, colonial or related to the international sexual and racial labor divisions, which add on top of these neoliberal ones that we all see with the gig economy. On the other hand, there's this situated knowledge that both me and Esther have here with our understanding of gender perspectives or various work situations where I would engage as a researcher in my fieldwork, and these are useful to have our own situated knowledge that we can put and mirror with those from other parts of the world. On the other hand, it is equally important to understand that migrants themselves in the global north, but also the global south, they act as an infrastructure, as Van Dorn et al. Claim. One that is a vital, is as vitally important to these platforms' business models' viability as the steady influx of investment capital. And you can see there on the left-hand side a story of what it means to be a migrant and to be able to access this work that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. So now I will pass the mic to my colleague Esther to talk you through our two case studies or two dimensions of intersectionality that we are focusing on. Please go on, Esther.
Yes, thank you so much, Cosmin. So I'm taking over to explain firstly, one of the dimensions of this intersectionality that adds to the precariousness of riding a bicycle in these working conditions. And that is the case of women and non-binary people. And I would like to start with data. So actually there is an impressive gender gap in platform delivery with, as you say, between 5 and 13% in the different situations that we have had a look so far. So that's a big gender gap. We are also conscious that this gender gap is linked to the background gender gap in cycling for transport. And also we had seen already this gender gap in the precedent of cycle messengers, for example. One of the factors of influence that we can name here is that cycling entails a physical effort that is more intense to undertake for women, and that also this creates a perception of women being less competent in doing this kind of job, cycling for delivery work, because of this. So, but there are also self-protection strategies that women like to do, and have been pushed to doing actually when undertaking these works. And these could be divided into two groups: the individual self-protection strategies and the group self-protection strategies. So we are defending against hostility, sexual harassment, and neglect. And the individual aspect, women can go into self-isolation, hiding in solitary places, hiding their identities under clothes, for example, wearing hoodies and things like that, covering their face, for example. And what this creates is that they are missing information from peers, and this leads to eventually a financial disadvantage. So they get less offers, they get to know less tricks to access the system and to be more efficient in terms of generating money and profit. And this inequality adds to the gender pay gap that already exists in this sector. So this is creating another layer of precariousness in this sense. And also there is the group self-protection strategies in which women try to support each other through WhatsApp groups, for example, using social networks, or the groups that have been created in unions for women and non-binary groups, especially in the latest years. One example I'd like to share with you is the case of Nuria Soto, that was one of the creators of the platform Riders for Rights. And she also was one of the founders of the cooperative Mensacas, an alternative cooperative that does also cycling delivery. And she's been a very active woman in this regard. And a very important aspect, we believe, of this issue of women doing delivery work is their public exposure of their bodies. So when women's bodies are exposed, this leads to harassment. And so women live in a constant stress and feeling of unsafety. So this is affecting women and creates this forced hypermobility as well, led by the conditions of the platform and the algorithm functioning, in which they try to avoid certain areas or certain times of the day, but they might be pushed to do that anyway if they want to work in an efficient way or make enough money or be able to keep the ratings that Cosmin was sharing before in an acceptable level. So women have been also object of privacy infringements by the company, sharing their names and their phone numbers, for example. Some of these companies have changed this, but some not. And this exposes women to stalking. And if their names are visible, clients can then look them up in Facebook and try to contact them and send them unwanted messages and proposals and things like that. So this is, of course, a very important issue of privacy. And another aspect that we believe is very important and it's pivotal in cycling and gender research is to have a wider definition of what safety and security means for women and non-binary people. It's an overlap, a combined risk or a combined harassment coming from road and sexual risks and road and sexual violence toward women. So these things combine, and they create this situation in we can expect women riders being more exposed to a higher crash risk while doing the same job, because sexual harassment also increases the risk and distract women and can put women in unsafe situations while riding their bicycles, etc. So we believe there is an overlap here. There is a gap on the research on really getting to the nitty-gritty of how how much harassment, sexual harassment, increases the risk of, for example, road crashes in women in relation to men, for example. So we found that women are object of this sexual violence, not only from their companies, but also from sometimes their colleagues, clients, and passers-by. So this violence is coming from all ages, from all groups of interrelation that they have while doing this job. There is also a very important issue of occupational health. One of the important petitions that these unionized groups of women have been asking for is the access to toilets. So in many restaurants, while they're working, they won't be allowed to use the toilets, and this issue is creating an increased risk of urinary infection. So it's really no job for women's health, and it's a very, very basic need, human need, that is being denied to women workers. And they've also been denied to the right to have leave, for example, and not having to work while in pain, recovery from labor, exhaustion because of pregnancy or motherhood, etc. So all of this has come very clearly in the interviews that we've gone through. Here is picture one of a spray, and this is, as we were saying before, an element of self-defense that some of these women carry with them while they're working. So the dimension of migrants, we have been observing consistently an overrepresentation of migrants and ethnic minority groups in all cases, not only in the global north, but also in the global south, as this data is showing. So in Spain, 64% of riders are from Latin America, different countries in Latin America, but at the same time in Argentina, which is a country in Latin America, we find that 65% of one of the company Globos, and the other one, Rappi company, has 84% of their riders that are migrants. So they're actually not from Argentina. So these are very, very high numbers of migrants working for these companies. And we also have to note that the level of precarity varies depending on the individual circumstances, especially their migrant status. So whether they are documented or not, or undocumented, or their situation has been regularized or not. So if they're not documented, their situation is even more vulnerable than if they are. So we have also found that algorithms are biased against diverse working, for example, so the difficult of recognition of faces for some ethnic minorities, for example, and that can kick them out of the system if they are not recognized and they're not properly filed and confirmed their identities. So this is an algorithm actually working against these workers. And then platform companies seem to take advantage of the work restrictions that the systems of migration already imposed with these workers, making it difficult for them to get a documented status, a regularized status, so that they can work officially and have access to working rights and be registered in financial and health systems. And this creates a situation that is the app renting. The app renting is when one migrant worker that is undocumented rents the app so that he can work in an invisible way. So they don't have to register anywhere. There's someone else who has registered and rents the app to them, who are working on the streets for the person who owns the profile in the app. So basically, this is creating a lack of the most basic employment, financial, and health protection covered by the platforms that these people cannot access. And then there is the story in the second picture. You can see a protest in which they are all also remembering one of their colleagues, Pujan, a person from Nepal, a worker from Nepal who was do app renting in Barcelona and unfortunately died, and he was run over by a lorry. And this created a lot of distress because the company at the beginning didn't want to pay any insurance to this worker because he was not registered with the company. It was app renting. Finally, the company put some financial aid for the family, but only after all these protests were going on. So is this hacking the system, really, this app renting, or is actually convenient for the companies? This is a good question. And then we've also found that there has been immigration raids, sometimes with police undercover, like the first pictures shows, and many times have been assisted by platform companies. So platform companies facilitate that police can go and do their raids and try to identify these undocumented workers. There is fear of and silence in these workers. Undocumented migrants workers do not often participate in resistance strategies because they are afraid of being deported, or because they don't have they don't control the language, or they don't have knowledge, for example, of their workers' rights in this country or in the country they're working in. So resistance is a very important theme for us. So after going through all of these, exploring all of these situations for the different intersectionalities, the different levels of precarity, what are people are doing to resist all of this? So this is for us very important point, and there's the capacity of these platform workers to self-organize has been dismissed and is quite impressive. They are at the vanguard of strikes and protests, and at a global level. So it's happening across the world and sometimes coordinated in an international level. So there are individual forms of contesting the algorithm as well. People work in multiple platforms, reject longer distance orders, switch to different vehicle to get more orders, maybe delay collection of orders from restaurants to be allocated a double order, so etc. But one of the very important alternatives that we would like to highlight is the cooperativism. So there is even a European Federation of bike delivery co-ops, because lately there have been created quite a few, especially from workers, ex-workers from platforms that they have created their own alternative, as I have explained before with the case of Nura Soto and Mensacas in Barcelona. And also to mention, there has been international coordination for the strikes, and there has been quite an effectiveness in dealing with those strikes with that, because also the companies are global. So there are the same companies in different countries. And finally, a note about unions, because we have observed that unions have been newly created in parallel to existing unions, because these kind of workers don't fit in the definition of worker that have been protected by existing unions. So they need to create their own unions, their own platforms. And also that we have been learning about a global initiative, a global platform of unions uniting all of these different unions spread out all over the world to be able to act when the companies are global and to be in touch with each other.
Thank you very much. So this was indeed a marathon. I would like to go to the conclusions, not before mentioning that the illustrations, the couple of illustrations you have seen in these presentations, they belong to some of the illustrators I work with for my project. Jose Sherwood and Juan Alohan are some of them, and some of the illustrations you could see there. To conclude, we would say that this chapter shows that the intersectional layers of precarious work, which start with an intrinsic precarity of cycle mobility, so the kind of a precarious entitlement to the road that we have been discussing. We have also demonstrated that amongst cycle food couriers, there is a minority of women indeed, as well as a majority of migrants, whose work experiences are not only hidden from view, but most importantly are indicative of what we call additional discrimination exploitation processes which are at work in the gig economy. Equally important, colonial dynamics we have showed that are still playing a remarkable role in both how oppression and resistance occur, and challenging neoliberalism and conquering technology could work as a way to resist the history of conquest that countries in the global south have indeed been subject to. And even in increasing digitalized and atomized work environment, organization of workers is created at street level. So here it is the role of the bicycle, its flexibility, and cycles more generally, which have this capacity to create sociabilities and to be used indeed as an instrument of resistance, as we have seen throughout this presentation. Thank you very much.